Hi, I'm Victor Miller. I wrote Friday the 13th, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of GenreTainment here at SciFiPulseRadio.com. We're your hosts, Marx
and Julie, and today we are speaking to comic book writer and columnist Dirk Manning, who has recently released his new book, Right or Wrong, A Writer's Guide to Creating Comics. Manning tells us about his new book, his experience writing comic books like his anthology series, Nightmare World, and others, and his recent scriptwriting work on the award-winning web series Black Box TV.
Before we get started with the interview, we wanted to point out that the music you just heard at the beginning of the show was a snippet from the theme song for our web series Reality on Demand, a song composed and performed by our friend T-Sean Harding. Now you can find our web series at realityondemandseries.com.
Since comic books don't usually have music, we start and end the interview with a snippet from one of the songs by Short Notice, which was also played in our web series. It's called Sanctuary, and it has a slightly dark vibe that fits the horror-themed work of Manning.
Mm-hmm. And Short Notice was actually one of our music guests in an earlier episode.
Yes.
Now let's get started with our featured interview for today with writer Dirk Manning.
God created Adam, God created Eve, God created paradise for them to never leave. God gave his conditions, they did not obey, cast out for eternity, a heavy price to pay. It's been so long, I need sanctuary.
We're listening to GenreTainment, and today we have writer Dirk Manning visiting us again on the show. He has recently released his book, Right or Wrong, A Writer's Guide to Creating Comics. Hi, Dirk.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this new book and why you decided to start writing the column that the book is based off of.
Yeah, as you said, about this the Right or Wrong, A Writer's Guide to Creating Comics, which is available on Amazon.com, I might add. Sorry, that was my cheap plug. But
and we should probably say right as in W-R-I-T-E.
Oh, yes.
Yes, because I'm very witty and punny like that.
Well, we don't want him searching for the wrong thing.
What's this book? Ethics and Morality or something.
Yeah.
This is about creating comics. And I started the Right or Wrong, W-R-I-T-E, as a column and my sole intention was to create a column that could be a resource for people that wanted to write comics but couldn't draw. And to that end, really, my sole goal was just to help people learn how to. I get a little bit into the foundations of script writing, but I think there's a lot of other books about that already. So what I really sought to do was create a book like, okay, if you know you can write, you've read Understanding Comics and things like that, the Eisner stuff, and you understand the fundamental foundations of how to put a script together. I still talk about that in the book slightly, but the bigger emphasis of this book is how do you meet artists? How do you successfully network with people and create a team and keep your team going and develop the discipline and question, why you're doing this? Why do you want to create comics? In fact, the very first chapter of the book is called Why Comics? And it's a question that I suggest that all of the people interested ask themselves. So in that sense, the book is kind of like half practice and half foundation, probably even more, your half, theory of why you want to create comics and how to create comics, how to manage your team and things like that. I was very fortunate. I've told this story a million times, and I tell it in the book to make it 1,000,001. When I started my comic book career doing the series Nightmare World, which eventually got picked up by Image Comics, Shadowline, and there's a couple of trade paperbacks out there. But I lived in the Midwest. I didn't even have a computer in my own home. I did not have I had a computer. I didn't have an internet connection. I had to go to the library to use the computer, things like that. I lived in Ohio. I knew no artists of a caliber that could work in comics. And I was really fortunate to kind of meet some artists online and learn kind of the game a little bit and learn the ropes and turn it into a fairly successful, or at least entertaining and personally satisfying comic book creating career. And I vowed, and I was like the little Chef Boyardee kid in the old Chef Boyardee, someday I will create a pasta that tastes. I vowed that if I ever got that chance, if I ever got to start making comics, I would do anything and everything I could to help other people that were in my position. We did the column online for free for 5 years over at Newsarama. Matt Brady at Newsarama agreed to pick up the column for Newsarama, and we ran with it, like I said, for 5 years. I took last year off from the column, the online version, which there's about 70 some installments of it, and boiled it down, a good portion of it, into 26 chapters of this book. Like I said, we just talk about how to meet artists, where to meet artists, how to network with them, how to lead your team, and just be successful in creating comics, going from a guy or girl that you can to this is how you can. And in the book's just everything I could tell anybody about how to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a good point. I noticed there's a 1 on the book. So will there be a sequel to the book, perhaps?
Yes. It probably won't be for, a minimum, no sooner than 2014. Took a year putting this one together, and put a lot of other stuff off to the side to do it, despite it coming mainly from a lot of pre-existing columns. I kind of reformatted stuff for the book and updated it. There definitely will be at some point, like I said, maybe a year or so after this one really kind of permeates into the public conscience of everyone. But I get the Pulitzer for it or whatever.
Well, now you said that you were very far removed from the comic book world as far as creation goes. What was it that made you decide this is what I'm going to make comics? I don't know how to get started. I don't know where to begin, but gosh darn it, I'm going to do it. What was the catalyst for that?
Watchmen by Alan Moore, the comic. Comics are just such a cool medium to tell stories, and it's a very unique medium. There's a way to tell stories in comic books that you can't do anywhere else. You can't. I've written stuff for film that's been produced. It's different. I've written prose stuff. It's different. The late great Harvey Pekar said, comics are words and pictures, and you can do anything with words and pictures. Mm-hmm. It's really what it boils down to. I love the juxtaposition. I love the way you can just do so much and tell there's such a unique approach to the storytelling that are so fascinating, and when it's done right, it's so very, very powerful. I didn't really grow up reading comic books. I read a couple things here and there and things like that. I was a voracious reader, and I was a voracious reader, especially like short stories. I loved the Stephen King short story stuff. As I got older, and Edgar Allan Poe, obviously. As I got older, I got into like Harlan Ellison and Lovecraft and Kafka. Ray Bradbury, ever since I was young, was a huge one.
Oh, I love Ray Bradbury.
It's just, wow. One of my biggest regrets in life is I had mono when Ray Bradbury came to where I lived at the time, and I could not drag myself out to go see him just to bow at the altar, and I spend the rest of my life bowing to the altar of guys like Ray Bradbury and Ellison, who just were such amazing speculative fiction writers. I didn't grow up a superhero kid, and that's one of the things that I think I constantly try to educate people on. Pretentious as that may sound, but I think the public at large is getting more and more aware that graphic novels and comic books are more than just superhero stuff. It's not that I dislike superhero stuff, but that's not what speaks to me. Mm-hmm. I sit here in an office surrounded by, I'm afraid to count how many graphic novels, hundreds. My walls are just lined with them. I'm surrounded by bookshelves covered with graphic novels. I have a graphic novel spinner rack, and probably less than 25%, and that's probably even a pretty high number, probably even much less than that, are spandex based. Again, because that's not necessarily what speaks to me. I'm a horror baby. I write Nightmare World. I write love stories about death and tales of mystery and things like that. That's primarily what I'm interested in. But, you can do slice of life stuff. You can do science fiction. You can do horror. There's just so much cool stuff. And it's just such a powerful medium. And when you get it right and when you really embrace what makes comic books unique, and I think that, Watchmen by Alan Moore really did this in regards to storytelling. There's just no going back, man. Not for me, Some people love film, some people love prose, but for me, first and foremost, I'm a guy that enjoys creating stories, telling using the comic book medium.
Well, you talk a little bit about in the book, part of the reason why you don't always get into superhero comics as much about theme, and partly why Watchmen has strong themes, and that's what attracted you to it, and The Crow.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? About how I like how you say it in the book, like when you create your characters, especially the superhero, don't think that people are going to care about them. They're not going to care about them because they don't know them yet. They haven't been, sewed on the branding like Marvel and DC has done for years. And so you have to build your story about powerful themes that the audience can appreciate. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I think that's most important because, as you said, I talk about in the book, a lot of people get into wanting to write comic books because they grew up reading comic books. And in America, that probably means you read superhero comics. I mean, Watchmen on the surface level, at least, is a superhero comic, but usually what you have to do as a writer, I think, to be successful is really develop a strong theme. What's the emotional core of your story? What do you want to say about the world around you? Or what do you want to say about yourself? Or what do you want to say about society? What do you want to say about life? There are superhero books that can do that, but I would argue that a lot of times it's tougher. And it's tougher because, in essence, you're talking about people in very colorful costumes that are all powerful or not, or Batman, that can do that it's really sometimes, I would argue, much more difficult to speak to the human condition in that way because I'm not, contrary to popular belief, I'm not Batman. But what I talk about in the book as well is when you look at the truly iconic characters, your Spider-Man, for example, he's the nerd that's really capable of extraordinary things. He's the nerd that can give so much more, but no one knows it. Or you look at a guy like Batman, who turned this very negative thing in his life to a very positive thing. And arguably, you could even argue to the point of obsession, which could be seen as kind of bad.
Yeah.
But, and there are those stories that go that way. There's the Batman stories to talk about the theme of, I took this negative things, my parents getting just slaughtered in front of me, and now I, save my city. But then you have the Dark Knight stories about this kid who's emotionally stunted, becomes obsessed with this battle that he cannot possibly win. The Punisher, same way, he's fighting a war he can never win. Or you get like X-Men, who you have this theme of, the persecuted minority trying to survive in a world that hates them. That's the reason that those characters are iconic in their archetypes. It's also why people for so long have struggled with being able to successfully market or franchise Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
What does she stand for? There's no theme. That theme, the theme of a woman in a man's world is not relevant anymore, for the most part. There's the glass ceiling and all this stuff, but you're not going to tell Wonder Woman stories about this ultra powerful Amazonian goddess trying to get equal pay. Not a story I don't think very many people would read for very long. So what I encourage people is, superheroes are well and good, and you can tell stories with that revolve around a theme of superhero books, but you have to. I argue in the book that if you want to be successful, if you want to be noticed, you have to at least be aware of that. What's your theme? Not plot. Plot is boring. And the only people that are going to care about your plot is you. And you're going to care because you created the characters and you think this story is fascinating. But I would argue it's very hard to find an excessive amount of books that appeal to a mainstream large audience or that are even a really renowned and I hate to say the word is subjective as good, but praiseworthy based on the plot. I'll slaughter my own one of my own idols on this one. The plot of Watchmen, it's a superhero murder mystery. Whoop-de-friggin' do. That's not what makes that book good. The plot's kind of pedestrian and gets outrageous by the end. It's like, really? You stole the ending from The Outer Limits, really? But the storytelling techniques and stuff he uses and some of the themes that he explores in the book are pretty solid. The Crow, not a beautifully drawn book ever, but the theme and the emotional resonance that James O'Connor put in that book is what makes it so powerful. and that's just something that very early in the book I talked to writers about. I'm like, okay, plot. Anybody can write a plot. A third grader can write a plot. But what's your theme? What's your emotional resonance that's going to hook people in? Because I would argue that when people really like something, they like the way it moves them. They like the way it moves their heart and moves their soul. And that's what you got to do, whether it be with capes or not.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. As an adult, and really through Marx, gained more of an appreciation for a lot of comics and, some more superhero things. And I enjoyed, Justice League Unlimited, the animated series, and the Superman. But as a kid growing up, I didn't care for Superman. I thought, Batman was better. I didn't really care. I found them boring. I'm like, okay, so Superman is going to do the right thing. He always knows what the right thing is, and everything always comes out okay, and he's always right, and the bad guy's just always bad. And even, I remember being, 6, 7 years old going, that's boring. Who cares? There was nothing interesting about that at all. And I don't know. I must be in the minority as far as that goes.
I don't think you are, sure, they franchise Superman over and over and over again. Everyone's aware of Superman, but how many people in the world read Superman?
Yeah.
You're counting in the thousands.
Yeah. And, and as far as, talking about Wonder Woman, I never really completely connected with Wonder Woman, although it is sort of, in this day and age, I just kind of roll my eyes, just kind of like, oh, brother, because so often, even nowadays in a lot of superhero comics, the women are the victims. They're the damsels. The Ultimates did the remake, and they made
refrigerators.
Yeah, they made Wasp a battered woman, and I was like, oh, for the love of what is this, 1950 something? It's not. It seemed the superheroes, they can't quite seem, in my mind, oftentimes to catch up with the times.
Well, no, and a lot of that I would argue is because when people are young and they read superhero books, that influences the evolution of how they write comic books when they're older. But they're writing from almost like the dirt they grew up in, and I don't mean dirt as a negative, but the soil they grew out of was superhero books that used those same tropes. And as adults, even subconsciously, a lot of writers get trapped into those same tropes.
Yeah.
I've said before, and this is a very crass thing to say, but I'm going to say it publicly because, lo and behold, Dirk Manning creates controversy again. But, rape is the new bank robbery.
I know. That is so awful.
It's terrible, and it just makes me sick to my stomach because, back in the day, the worst thing you could do to someone was take their money. Everyone was struggling, and people were coming to this country, and they didn't have a dime to their name. And, oh, my God, if you rob the bank, that's the worst thing ever. Now you just have to to be a villain, you have to be sexually salacious, it seems.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is people just want shock value for just the sake of shock value because they think it makes them cool.
Yeah, and it's lazy, and it is. It's disgusting, and it's ridiculous, and it's just horrible. And then it's mainly it's violence against women, or if you want to make someone really creepy, make him gay.
Yeah,
like F you, man.
Yeah,
come on.
I think it's intellectually very lazy, just from an intellectual standpoint, and then from a human standpoint, I think it trivializes a very real problem that is very pervasive in really every culture still.
No, it is, and it just makes me sick to my stomach. And again, what you're then doing is you're creating moments that don't revolve around a theme.
Yeah.
Tell me, and I talk about this in Right or Wrong book at length, as Marx was saying, your job as a writer, or your task that you put upon yourself, like Atlas or like Sisyphus or whatever, is tell stories that reflect the way that you see the world. Mm-hmm. Tell me what you noticed. There's only one Dirk Manning. There's only one of each of you. There's only one of all of us. And if you're going to take the time and the effort to write these scripts and find artists and get people to share your vision and put this stuff out there, for the love of Pete, man, to talk about how you see the world around you. You got books like Eric Powell's The Goon, which is kind of this half noir, half comedy, half tragedy book. But it's unique and it's powerful, and I'm a huge mark for Eric Powell. I mean, just to a ridiculous degree. But The Goon is just this great book because it shows the world that he loves, or shows the world the way he sees it. And that's a book that only he could create. Or you got a guy like Mike Mignola who does Hellboy. It ties in monsters and fantasy and stuff like that. And this theme about this guy, Hellboy, who he's predestined to be the harbinger of the Armageddon. And he says, I don't want to do it. And this great, magnificent theme about can you change your fate and how much influence do you have on things like that? They're these real powerful, resonant themes. And going back to, Superman has had his moment. There was a great one issue. It was, I think, Action Comics 775, as I flash my geek card. But it was called What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. And they just made it into a movie called Superman versus the Elite. But basically you have the old-fashioned, like you said, square-jawed Superman versus the new hip modern. They were an anagram of the Authority. But the edgy, we kill the villains. And it really juxtaposed, Superman's values versus those values and what's right and what's wrong. But even, Robert Kirkman does Walking Dead, for example, or which is, obviously everyone knows about the zombie apocalypse and what happens after the zombie movie ends. Or you got a book like Bomb Queen by Jimmy Robinson, which is just this crazy, over-the-top, sexy, crass, disgustingly violent supervillain that won and keeps winning. Those are stories that only these creators I'm mentioning can tell. Nightmare World is a story only I could tell. There is no one else on the face of God's green earth that could take 52 different short stories, each one a different subgenre of horror, and weave them into one giant story. It's never been done before. It will never be done ever again, because that's my story. That's my background. That's my life on the page. And that's what I talk about in the book. That's what you got to do as a writer. Find the stories that only you can tell. Anybody can tell your little Batman story. And everyone has a Batman story. Each of you have a Batman story, a Superman story, a Spider-Man. You could tell one. Mm-hmm. We all can. Tell stories that only you can tell. Create your own world. Communicate, dredge up that stuff in your soul and tell the stories only you can tell. And that's a lot of what I talk about in the book, that trying to, help people realize that creating comics is a long, laborious, arduous, lonely road. As a result, you have to have a lot of passion about it, and I realize I'm like, shaking my fist in the air, and I guess my passion is probably coming out a little bit right now. But you have to be passionate enough about it that you're going to push ahead no matter what. I'm not going to push ahead no matter what to write Spider-Man, because that's not what I want to do. Dan Slott, who writes Amazing Spider-Man and was put on this earth to write Amazing Spider-Man. And that's why he pushed so hard to do it, and now he's doing it. But he's the exception to the rule. And even him, he did his own work before that. You need to find the stories that you are just genuinely passionate about telling and telling them. And that's really the first step into successfully creating comics.
Now,
sermon.
Another thing I like about this book is there aren't a lot of books on writing comics anyway, but this one is good from an independent comic book perspective, not trying to break into Marvel or DC, and also from someone who's a writer who's not an artist, which I'm not, and I'm sure most people aren't.
I can't even draw a crooked line.
Yeah, I always say I can't draw a straight stick person with a ruler. I'm just terrible.
So I think this is a great book that fills a niche that's been missing, and you spend a lot of time talking about how to get your team together and your artists. Can you talk a little bit about that, or I think a little bit about how to find those artists?
Yeah, and I talk in the book, I went through, when I started the column 5 years ago, one of the earliest things I did was I said, look, if you're really serious about finding artists, here's the places to go online. And I went back through in the book and found the most modern places where artists tend to hide online, and I say the word hide because people that draw like to draw, but they're the belles of the ball. And you got every writer ever, anybody who ever wants to create comics. It's like when they see artists, they try to glom onto them. Would you write my book? Would you write my book? And I even say in the book, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, here's the places to go to find them. I'm telling you this so you can start looking around, but don't initiate contact yet because things I want to tell you, And I even put like a little gag in the book. I'm like, go ahead, I'll wait for a minute. I have a couple lines of ellipses, it's like, okay, you're back now. and I spend a couple chapters really talking about, how to approach people that draw. And one of the most important things to keep in mind, there's a whole chapter called, chapter 7, Making First Contact. And then, we get into co-creation versus dictation, and none of them are robots. Several of these, because a lot of writers by default see artists as a means to an end. And that is the most disgusting and self-harmful attitude you can have. Artists are people that want to make a living, or at least have fun making art as well. And what you have to realize is when you approach artists and meet them, it's kind of like a marriage, and the worst thing to do is, and I use this analogy in the book, go up to an artist you like online and email them or whatever and say, hey, I really like your artwork. You want to do like this 50-page maxi series with me about vengeance and da-la-la-la? Because they are going to run like hell. And why wouldn't they? Because that's just like seeing a pretty girl or guy you like at the bar. You go up to this pretty girl and you notice her. She's very pretty, very beautiful. And you walk up to her and say, hi, my name's Dirk Manning. Let's get married. You have to start very small. And, there's a new artist, not a new artist, an artist I'm going to be working with for the first time. We're doing 2 short 4-page stories for these 2 different anthologies. We're going to see if we are compatible with each other. There's a courtship and you date and you ease into this stuff. And then if you work well together and if you enjoy working together and you have a similar artistic vision, then you keep working together and you work together more and more and more. But at the end of the day, the other thing to keep in mind is if someone really likes my writing or someone really likes his art, neither of us will necessarily have the clout when we get picked up for work for hire stuff to drag the other one with us. And whether or not that's even an obligation is something that you really need to ask yourself, that people need to consider. Because we'll use Ryan Otley came up through Digital Webbing, who I came up through, and he draws Invincible now. He originally was doing a bunch of little short stories with these different writers, and some I knew. And then he got picked up to draw Invincible for Robert Kirkman. And it became a super hit, and Invincible is a really, really good book, really great series. It's not that he betrayed anyone he worked with before. He's getting paid to do what he wants to do and because he's a professional. And any artist you approach is an aspiring professional, just like you as a writer are an aspiring professional. And what you have to realize going into this is the best thing you can do is make each other look good, help each other get work, be happy for each other, and hopefully, ideally, although very unlikely up front, make some money together. But at least have fun and treat each other as professionals. Have that integrity. I've had plenty of artists I've worked with over the years get bigger gigs after we were working together. Take the money. I am so genuinely happy. I was just talking yesterday night, as a matter of fact, to Rhee Dillon, who I talk about in the book was the guy that illustrated the first script I ever wrote and really is largely responsible for helping me become a comic book creator. And I talk in the story at length about how Rhee and I met online and things like that. I think he was 17 at the time, and I was like 21 or something. 22. But I went to the comic shop last week and I see he's doing all these covers for IDW books. And I'm so happy. And his wife, Renee, who he was just telling me last night, he's like, yeah, man, we've been married for 7 years now. I remember where I was when I was talking to Rhee, who, mind you, a little side note, Rhee and I have met in person one time. Mm-hmm. And I have known him for at least more than a decade, God, probably 15 years or something stupid like that now. Mm-hmm. But we've met once. But I was talking to him on the phone yesterday, wished me happy birthday, things like that. We were catching up for a minute. And I remember exactly where I was standing the first time he told me about Renee DeLise. And, and how they first met. And now they've been married for 7 years. And now Renee, she did that massive womanthology thing for Kickstarter and really blew the doors off and really changed the industry with that book. And it's not, and Renee, some of the first comic work Renee ever did was illustrated a story for Nightmare World called Violet, and she went on to do another one. But Rhee asked me to write a script for her to help get her some exposure and get some work out there for her. And now that I see Renee doing all this other stuff, it's not like I'm like, man, how come Renee won't work with me anymore? And I've had even writers come up to me and like, oh, you've worked with some of these people that are superstars now. That's got to piss you off. And I'm like, really? Why? This is my friend, man. I'm stoked. I'm excited. But I talk about other stuff in the book as well about how, these are other aspiring professionals. They're not robots. People that can draw are not your drawing robot. Yeah. We work with them in a professional partnership, in a union, in like a marriage almost. And you try to create great work together.
Yeah. When you said that with writers wanting to dictate so much, and treat them like robots, the artists. It kind of reminds me of, from my experience, sometimes directors with actors. I've seen directors who literally are like, okay, no, that's not right. I want you to kind of stand like this, kind of have your head at this angle, and then say the line like this.
Right.
And it's just kind of like, then why did you have people audition? Just, get mannequins and position them and have voiceovers.
And one of the reasons that, at least in a storytelling sense, I can make the characters do what I want, I guess. But at the same time, when I work with an artist, I'm working with them because I believe in their ability to tell the story visually better than I will.
Mm-hmm.
And give freedom.
Yeah, and then we've done, where people come in for auditions, and here we wrote, the script. And we wrote this character, and Marx created this character, and then, we'd have someone come in and do an audition, and it was just like, whoa, I hadn't thought of that character that way. But they just totally blew our minds, and we're like, you know what? I don't want to go back. We want this person, because this person brought a completely different dimension that we didn't think of to this character, but it's better. But if we were so closed-minded that we couldn't collaborate, we would have missed out on that opportunity.
And it's that synergy and stuff that really makes great art. Mm-hmm. That you're not always going to make $1 million, but you're going to make great art. I know we were talking a bit before the show about how in the last year or so, I started doing some script writing or attempted script writing or storytelling for Black Box TV, which is Tony Valenzuela's YouTube channel of short horror films. And when I write a script, and this is in the book, I know, Mark, you can probably attest to this, I give like a script sample, and I talk about how when I'm writing a script, I'm talking to the artist about what I see. Like, this is how I see this scene. And I'm sitting there, and I'm literally chatting through the script. I'm thinking we can't do something like this, and sometimes I say a camera angle, sometimes not. But then once I write it, I just give it to them. Now, you interpret this way you see fit. And it's a very rare day. It does happen on occasion, but maybe it's like, maybe we could do this a little bit differently. But by and large, the artists see visually more than I do. Mm-hmm. But when I started getting into script writing, I realized that I was very much approaching it from a comic book writer's perspective, in that when you're writing a script for a movie, you're only writing what happens. I don't play the role of the director. My first version of the script, I'm like, okay, then you take the camera up the stairs and you go to this scene and you see this thing. And they're like, what the hell are you doing, Dirk? They're like, no. You just write, character A walks into a room, says this. Character B says this. You don't get to say, and he looks at him incredulously and raises his eyebrow and pounds his fist on the table. That's the director's job. Mm-hmm. Then the actors, need to kind of take the vision of the director and interpret that, as you were saying, the way that they see fit. And it was just a really huge wake-up call. I'm like, man, screw this. I'm going back to comics. No, but I've continued to enjoy a lot of fun, working with Tony and Black Box TV and stuff like that. But it was a big wake-up call, and it was just a whole different type of storytelling, And that's something that, earlier on you were asking, is there going to be a second Right or Wrong book? Yeah. And the second book is going to be about, okay, now that you've created comics, what do you do now? And I'm going to talk about the convention circuit and things like that. And one of the things I'll probably get into in the second book, I would imagine, I shudder and I start curling up in a ball and rocking back and forth, weeping at the idea of doing a third book. But talking about how a lot of people want to take comic book writing and then transfer right to making movies. I've been in that road a little bit. I've been on that path, and it's not, like I was just saying, it's not what you think. I wrote a comic, now I could write a movie. No. Do you want to write comics or do you want to write movies? They're two totally different things. It's big. It's a big topic, I guess, which is why it's a big 216-page book. And these 216 pages only talk about how to actually get to the point where you can make comics, not even promote them and go on the convention circuit, and when people approach you about optioning your work and all this other stuff. So
Now you're kind of in the cutting edge of two different areas in a way. With Nightmare World, you were one of the first people to do a web comic to launch online before ever putting it in print. And then also, like you talked about Black Box TV, you're doing some writing for a web series, which is sort of the new independent version of television.
How far would you go to take care of those you love? To make sure that they remain healthy? Black Box TV presents The Hunger.
How do you feel about those two mediums, and what do you think their futures are?
I guess I kind of think the same thing I thought in 2002 when I started Nightmare World as an online comic, which is, why isn't everyone doing this? It's absolutely the way it is. With Nightmare World, I started publishing my work online because there's an older book by a writer, Warren Ellis, very prominent comic book writer and creator. He's gone on to do some other novels, things like that now. He did a column for Comic Book Resources years ago called Coming Alone. And one of the things that I read in his column that really opened my eyes and changed the whole trajectory of my life, because Warren Ellis was very much and always on the cutting edge of technology and borderline a futurist, but he had his thumb right on the pulse of what was going on. And he talked about at the time the glory of the internet, the interweb. And he said, if you create a website, if I create dirkmanning.com, I have just as much frontage on the internet as Disney. But the only catch is when people go to sit down at the computer, I got to get them to go to nightmareworld.com or dirkmanning.com rather than disney.com. Mm-hmm. And to me, I was like, well, there it is. And the fact that now, because I couldn't afford to publish, and I talk about this in the book, when I first started doing Nightmare World, I couldn't afford to publish it. There was no print on demand like there is now. Nowadays, it's crazy. I could write a comic and you guys could draw it up. You could do your little stick figures with rulers or whatever. I could print 10 copies, or I could take them to a convention. I could print 100 copies. I could print 1,000 copies. I could print one copy. I could print 2 copies. We each have one to share. The technology is there now that we can all do it yourself. Be it in comics or in film. Tony Valenzuela was making his own little short films through Black Box TV on YouTube. And as was the case with some other people, I think they did this with Epic Rap Battles of History and a couple others. YouTube picked them up and said, we'll pay you to make content exclusively for us. We're to a point now where it's just, the technology is there that you got to get out there and do it yourself, man. It's a punk rock ethic, mm-hmm. DIY, do it yourself. I did music journalism for years. Metallica back in the day, who's now one of the most renowned heavy metal bands, they got out there originally by bootlegging their own work and giving it to everyone and putting their feet on the ground. There's no substitute for hard work. What we're seeing now, however, with all this technology and all these advances, YouTube and print on demand, things like that, is that the record industry has collapsed because of this. And if comics aren't careful, this is going to happen here too. The gatekeepers are becoming irrelevant. Mm-hmm. I don't need a contract to make comics and sell them. I can market myself. I can make them myself. I can get out there and push them myself. I branded myself. That's why my picture is a little guy with a top hat and sunglasses and a scarf on. Newsflash, that's not what I look like right now when I'm talking.
Really?
Really? I thought you did that all the time.
Even in the bathroom, like Dirk Manning eating in the bathroom, top hat, scarf, You can create your own brand and you can market your own brand, and there's Facebook and there's Twitter, and remember MySpace, and MySpace is coming back for 5 minutes and it'll be gone again. There's all this stuff, that you can market yourself. And what's really happening is, to answer your question, I guess, very directly, Marx, is the gatekeepers are becoming irrelevant. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening. And that's very, very powerful. Sturgeon's Law, 90% of everything is crap. Mm-hmm. For that 10% that can't or doesn't want to play the game and kowtow to the gatekeepers, that's when you get womanthology. That's when you get these other books that you can get out there. I mean, Kickstarter, holy F. One of the things that I have not done yet is done a Kickstarter campaign because I'm waiting for the right property to do it with. But that's on my mind more and more, because I know if I do a second Right or Wrong book, I'm going to have to talk about Kickstarter. And then I'm going to have to be able to talk about Kickstarter is do it.
Yeah.
And I just don't have the time yet to devote to doing that, because that would be a job in and of itself. Right. But yeah, man, the gatekeepers are going away. And as a result, the gatekeepers now are going to have to realize, okay, we want you to work with us. Not that the creators want to work with them. The publishers need to say, whether it be a film or of music or of comics, these publishers need to say, what can we get you to work with us? Mm-hmm. What can we offer you? And very slowly, but very surely, I think the pendulum is swinging that way more and more.
I think it's really more on creators to be sort of a jack of all trades now. You can't just say, well, I'm going to write something or I'm going to film something. You need to be responsible for your own branding, your own marketing, and, sort of social networking and that kind of thing. So, in a lot of ways, it's a lot more work, but you also are able to have a little bit more control.
Right, and it's a lot more, but again, it's punk rock, man. I mean,
Yeah.
you just get out there and do it yourself and push and make it where people want to work with you, see the value of working with you, and go that way. And it's a lot of work. I live on this damn computer. It wrecks my life, but it's what I got to do. Marketing my brand is a 24-hour job. Mm-hmm. And when people want to co-opt my brand or misrepresent my brand, or when they want to promote my brand and help talk about the great stuff that Dirk Manning is affiliated with, it's my job to continue to mold that and grow that.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited about it. I think it is a step in the right direction, because if you think about it, in the old days, you had people got together. We like to play music and write music, so we get together and play music and write music, and they would do the hard work and they'd play the circuits and they'd build their fan base. And back then, even more recently, you got, say, Nirvana. Nowadays, you have, I want to get on TV and I want someone to justify my existence, and now you have Justin Bieber, and
Justin Bieber's another guy that, I mean, he busted his ass, and he went out there and he made a name for himself,
Yeah, but now he has somebody who, decides this and handles his imaging and handles his, a lot of these pop artists now, they have someone else decides what their brand's going to be, someone else decides, what they're going to do, and someone else writes their music, and it doesn't seem as authentic.
No, because there is a machine there.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about, I think before we started taping, about I was watching the Morgan Spurlock documentary yesterday, Greatest Movie Ever Sold. And it talks about that, about once other people start investing their money into it, how much of your integrity, how much of your vision, how much of your passion are you willing to give up? I talked earlier about Alan Moore is a hero, a mentor of mine, in regards to his craft, the way he approaches the craft of comics. Mm-hmm. Alan Moore is not for sale. And when they misrepresented his work, like the awful League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie, he said, I don't even want the money. Screw your money. Just don't even put my name on it. Don't even put my name on Watchmen movie, things like that. But it's a decision that you have to make when you get to that stage in the game about what's important. Is it important to get paid? Is it important to keep creative control? The Walking Dead TV show is on their third showrunner. And a lot of people are saying, well, it's probably because of Robert Kirkman. Well, he's managing his brand and he has the clout to do it. He's like, listen, you bastards, I've got this is one of the biggest shows on television. You're not screwing it up. You're not screwing up my brand. You're not screwing up my image. You're not screwing up my work. But here's the thing. He owns The Walking Dead. That's his baby. Mm-hmm. He's not work for hire. If I write a Spider-Man script for Marvel Comics and give it to him, they can do whatever the hell they want with it, and I get a check. His check is based on whether or not his work continues to sell and be the work that he wants it to be. And there's a very fundamental difference there. Is Justin Bieber just cashing checks now? Maybe. If Kurt Cobain was still alive, would we see Nirvana songs in Chevy commercials?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah, maybe. I just saw a car commercial recently with Iggy Pop playing in it.
Yeah.
Because you know what? Show me them. Okay, fine. It doesn't, so it's an interesting thing. And there are certainly worse problems to have.
There are, yeah. And that is very much, you see the guys and the gals who were the rebels back in the day, the rock stars that were, doing drugs and tearing up hotel rooms. And now, like you said, you'll be watching a car commercial and you're like, isn't that so-and-so? And, they're doing reality shows and this and that and staging everything because now their brand is a business. Their image is a business.
Yeah, what's the commercial? Oh God, the guy from Journey or whatever is doing like the vacation.
Oh, Eddie Money. I just saw that. Eddie Money
Yeah,
singing Two Tickets to Paradise.
yeah, that's the one.
I saw that. I thought, oh my God.
But he knows. But you
Yeah.
know what? He's getting a paycheck and he's happy and he's putting himself out there again and stuff like that. And what's he care? But again, it's this question you want to have. Let's say that theoretically someone wanted to option Nightmare World for a television franchise, for example. I will have some very serious questions to ask myself. How much do I want to get in the way? I know a very prominent creator who, based on what he says, squashed the idea of his property. And mind you, this is an older property of his, becoming a movie because he didn't like the way they're going to approach the work. And he said, I'll have nothing to do with that. You're not going to turn it into this. Screw you.
Mm-hmm.
And he squashed the deal. Okay, cool. I respect his integrity on that, and I respect that he doesn't want his vision to be co-opted that way. The flip side of that is, you know what? The book will always exist.
Mm-hmm.
Nightmare World will always exist as a book. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen will always exist as a book. Whatever. Walking Dead will always exist as a book. And if you want to make it a comedy or a musical or whatever, do I just take the money, or do I, say no and protect the integrity of multimedia interpretations of my product? And will a bad TV show or a bad movie negatively influence the perception of my work and my book?
Mm-hmm.
These are all things to think about, and that's stuff that definitely in the next, when I do the second Right or Wrong book, we'll be talking about that stuff more. The first one is just about that punk rock ethic, just getting out there and creating the work. There are much worse problems to have than, gosh, how are they going to reinterpret my work for film? If you're young and hungry, you're just going to say, pay me.
Yeah, there are worse problems, like how am I going to pay to keep a roof over my head this month?
Yes.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because people don't realize how expensive it is to do independent creation. Like independent film can be very expensive depending upon how you do it. And I think people, at least some point, realize that it could be.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't realize how expensive comic books can be to create. You talk a little bit about that in the book. Can you just give, and you go way more detail in the book, but just a roundabout figure, how much would it cost someone who goes, I want to create a 22-page comic book? How much are they looking at?
I talk about in the book, you could be looking at easily, if you're paying for everything, up to $65 a page for a comic page, depending, with another indie guy that's kind of scrapping and fighting like you are, which could put you around $1,400 for a 22-page full color book. I'll say again, $1,400.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's a lot. That's if you're paying everyone. And I talk about in the book as well, but you don't always have to offer money either. There's other ways to go about this, and if someone's really passionate about it, when I started Nightmare World, one of the biggest things I talked to people about was the fact that, this is exposure, for your work, as we're all starting out. I'm putting this stuff online for free. And a lot of people, and some people turn their noses up, and I'm like, everyone will see it. Mm-hmm. You can just tell people, hey, do you want to see that I can draw comics, Marvel? Go look at this website. Or here's an online portfolio. Mm-hmm. They're creating pieces for their portfolio. It's not all about money. And as stereotypical as this may sound, a lot of artists aren't necessarily in it first and foremost for the money initially, up front. But, I mean, if you just want to go hire people and pay them and stuff like that, you could be looking at easily $65 a page minimum. Mm-hmm. But again, I talk about this at length in the book. It's not just about the money. And you can work with people. People work with you for free initially in the event that there are other perks that they're getting out of this. Mm-hmm. If someone really wants to draw Cthulhu, damn it, man, it is your job to give them a cool, short Cthulhu story to draw. Because why not? They're going to draw something anyway. Yeah. Let's draw something together and let's put it out there and let's make a comic out of it and go that way,
Yeah. That happens a lot in filmmaking. You eventually you start networking. You find, well, this person has some sound equipment. This person's got this camera. This is an actor. They want to get some work and get some exposure. And then, you talk and it's really bartering and trading. And then it's also, hey, we're all going to get exposure. We're all going to have things for a demo reel, and you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, you're creating opportunities to try to work your way up.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly what it comes down to is, and there were people that scoffed at the idea of doing 8 pages with me for no money up front. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, good luck proving to editors and stuff that you're worthy of $50 a page if you have nothing to show for it. Or, because again, with Nightmare World, I was able to offer exposure to a lot of these guys and gals coming up and stuff like that. And I gave them stuff they wanted to draw. And it's like, if you're going to be drawing samples anyway, you might as well draw something that people will see and, we can get something out of it. And this gives you the opportunity to work with a guy that can write. Right, kind of well, and this way, how do I put this into 6 panels as opposed to just I'm going to draw a 4-panel page, so it was definitely a process and definitely, it's a partnership and it's a marriage. And again, we're all just professionals. We're scrapping and trying to, move our way up in the world, which is in a lot of, it's Nightmare World did a lot of good for me. It did a lot of good for many of the artists I worked with. Yeah, that's the stuff we talk about in the book, and just give, like you said earlier on, I came up from nothing. Is I can at least say that this is everything I could possibly tell anybody that wants to write about how to make comics, network with artists, and the philosophy, what I consider to be the right approach to have, and things like that, and how to break in without just blindly sending pitches to Marvel and DC because they won't read them,
Yeah, it's interesting how you said, people sort of scoff at that idea of let's band together and we can at least get some exposure, because, a lot of these same people would think nothing of either they or their children doing an unpaid internship during a time at a university for the experience. And this is very much the same thing. You're giving yourself your own work experience. But some people think because it doesn't have a stamp of corporate approval, it doesn't count.
Well, right, which is the biggest myth at all about branding. I'm very happy that a lot of my work comes out through Image Comics Shadowline. I'm proud to be affiliated with Jim Valentino's brand, with Jim Valentino's family of books and stuff like that. That definitely lends a certain amount of credibility to my work as opposed to self-publishing. It's not that my self-published work was any worse. It's the same work. Yeah. But now, people are seeing, he's with Shadowline. That means something. But like you said, at the end of the day, too, you have to get out there and you have to do the work, and you have to get out there and be willing to pay your dues. You have to earn it. Yeah. And just because you work for it doesn't mean you're going to get it.
Right.
But you'll never get it if you don't work for it. You're just pushing the needle in your favor a little more. And there's a lot of things that have to happen, a lot of hard work, there's to be hard work, talent, and arguably a little bit of luck. And nothing is guaranteed in anything, whether you're talking about creating comics, creating film, whatever. But I do know for a fact that if you have integrity, if you're smart about how you do things, you pick your battles well, and you work to hone your craft, which is all the stuff I talk about in the book, you can greatly increase your chances of finding the success that you want to find, or at least having a hell of a lot of fun. If I was to fall off the face of the earth tomorrow, god damn, man, I made my baby. I made Nightmare World. I made Tales of Mystery. I made Love Stories About Death. I got to write short films with Black Box TV. I got to write this book about helping other writers create comics. I made what I consider to be the Bible for anybody that wants to write comics but can't draw, to help them get started. I haven't made $1 million yet, but I'm happy. Yeah. I'm smiling just saying it. That's the name of the game. When all said and done, that's the name of the game. I got to work with Riley Rossmo for a short story for him for a comic that comes out Wednesday, and I've made a lot of good friends. I'm pretty good, man. I'm pretty good.
Well, good. Let's give you another chance to tell our listeners where they can find your book and you online.
Yeah, I'll say pretty much everything else.
we've been talking, about Right or Wrong, WRITE, A Writer's Guide to Creating Comics. It's on Amazon. I think it's about $16. If you're a creative type at all, and if you're anyone that's interested in writing, comics especially, obviously, but you owe it to yourself to spend $16 on yourself. I'm not looking to get rich off this. I'm just saying I wrote the book. If you want to create comics, this book is for you. This is the book that will help you. I did not go to a giant mega publisher and get this huge royalty advance and all this to write this book. I wrote this book to help people because that was the promise I made myself that I would do if people wanted to create comics and didn't know how to get started. So, Right or Wrong's on Amazon. The 3 Nightmare World trade paperbacks I've written. If you're into horror stuff and speculative fiction, like the stuff like Howard Nelson, Ray Bradbury, and H.P. Lovecraft, I would highly recommend you check out the 3 Nightmare World trade paperbacks on Amazon. I've been doing some short films with Black Box TV, so much love to Tony Valenzuela and Black Box TV on YouTube. And this coming Wednesday, I will have a short story in Dias de la Mortis #1 with artist Riley Rossmo. It's reverse Nightmare World. In Nightmare World, I wrote all the stories and different artists illustrated each one. Riley Rossmo is doing this great book from Image Comics Shadowline. He approached a bunch of different writers, and I was one of them. And he said he wanted us each to write him a story about Day of the Dead, a Mexican Day of the Dead, that he would, not the movie, the holiday, that he would then illustrate our scripts. And I'm the last story in the first issue, Te Vas Angel Mio. And it's about a mariachi player who's performing at the Day of the Dead and sees someone in the crowd that reminds him of his lost love. And there's a lot more to the story than that. It's not the typical, obviously Day of the Dead, No. So I got a little more in me than that. So it's, if people like comics, want to go check it out, Dias de la Mortis #1 will be in shops on the 6th. And other than that, people can find me on Twitter or on Facebook at just Dirk Manning, all one word, guy in the top hat and the glasses, not the wrestler. And, my comic work's all available online at shadowlineonline.com. People can check that out in the webcomic section.
Well, I really enjoyed Nightmare World. I liked your combination of devil, angel type stuff, apocalypse elements combined with Cthulhu, Lovecraft elements. I thought it was really cool.
Oh, yeah, you throw in even a little bit of Cthulhu. Marx is there.
Yeah, I'm a big Lovecraft fan.
Yeah, the best compliment, the best description I've heard of Nightmare World was the Cthulhu mythos meets John Milton's Paradise Lost.
Oh, that is good.
That's it. That's what it boils down to, But thank you, and I appreciate you taking time to check out the Right or Wrong book as well. I really appreciate that as well. So, Thank you for that.
I enjoyed it. I've always wanted to make a comic book. Actually, probably before I wanted to do filmmaking. That's what I wanted to do. I think because I was intimidated by how to make films, I didn't have a lot of people around me who knew how to do that. So the only thing I kind of knew would be how to write. So I thought, well, comic books would be easier to break into, and I read so many comic books. But then when I went to film school, that changed. Everything flip-flopped.
Yeah.
But someday I would like to do a comic book story. So, and if I do, you'll probably get a special thanks.
My thank you would be you doing it. One of the things that people ask me a lot of times is like, why are you're telling all these people how to create comics and stuff like that? Aren't you creating your own competition? It's like, no, man, I'm creating more good comics that I can read.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you want more good art in the world? Why wouldn't you want more good stuff in the world,
Right. So that's it. It's not a competition. There's only one Dirk Manning. No one's going to make the comics I want to write, but I want to read the comics that you want to write.
Farewell, sanctuary.
This is Michael Flores, Creative Western X, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
Thanks to Dirk for agreeing to visit the show again, and we wish him luck with his book and other future projects.
So that's it for today's GenreTainment. Check back next week with all new guests from our favorite films, TV shows, novels, and web series.
Including writer and consultant Jennifer Dornbush about her new book, Forensic Speak, How to Write Realistic Crime Dramas, plus more web series interviews, like our upcoming interview with one of the stars of the action comedy web series, Adventures of Super 7. I think you should have to say it like that.
Super
Adventures
7.
of Super 7. and our fun interview with the cast and crew of the supernatural web series Malice.
And don't forget, you can check out all of our past episodes in the archives at sci-fi-pulse-radio.com. You can also check out the other great shows on this channel like SFP Now, The Roundtable, and Jeff Trek.
GenreTainment will be back right here on this channel at sci-fi-pulse-radio.com next Tuesday. Thanks everyone for listening.
Until next time.